Jesus is the reason for the season, or at least that's what Christians love to claim. In Bill Bryson's latest book, The Secret History of Christmas, he mentions that the discovery of slaughtered pigs at Stonehenge suggests that winter festivals took place there in December and January, nearly 5,000 years ago. Recorded history has plenty of examples of winter festivals as well, the Saturnalia in Rome being one of the most popular. Even if it had no direct influence on Christmas, we can all agree that it was happening long before Christianity came on the scene. Even in Eastern cultures such as China, the winter solstice was recognized centuries before Christianity existed. Nobody has a monopoly on celebrating the changing of the seasons. I grew up in Michigan, where we generally get lots of snow in December. As a kid, you can't help but be awed at how much the scenery changes and how fun it is to play in the snow. Even many adults who see snow for the first time marvel at its beauty. That being said, I don't think our ancient ancestors were much different in that regard. Winter has a magic all its own, regardless of which religious or mythological narrative you impose upon it. And so, it's not surprising that humans in ancient times would have festivals during this season. If Jesus never existed, there's a good possibility that we still be celebrating the winter season in some form or another. The Christmas that we celebrate in 21st century America is relatively new. The only solid connection that it has to the ancient past is St. Nicholas, a 4th century bishop of Myra. In one of the legends about St. Nicholas, 3 girls were going to be sold into prostitution because their father couldn't afford to marry them off. When Nicholas heard about the situation, he went to the house of the 3 girls and he threw 3 bags of gold through the window. Aside from the name and the reputation for gift giving, our fat-bellied, rosy-cheeked Santa Claus has little in common with St. Nicholas. The Christmas that we know owes its existence to 4 key figures. Charles Dickens is responsible for reviving Christmas when it was a severely diminished holiday. While he didn't invent Christmas, his famous novel, A Christmas Carol, embodies a modern Christmas spirit. In his cautionary tale about the selfish moneylender Ebenezer Scrooge, he describes Christmas as a good time, a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time, the only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of other people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. Queen Victoria played a role in the transformation of Christmas as well. With her introduction of the Christmas tree and her emphasis on family, she helped to make the holiday more about children. In centuries past, Christmas was more of an adult holiday that involved lots of drinking and revelry. In her book, A Biography of Christmas, Judith Flander writes, "Even so, from the start, Christmas seemed determined to break away from religion. Sometime before his death in 389, Gregory of Nazianzus, Archbishop of Constantinople, found it necessary to warn against dancing and feasting to excess that were occurring on the holy day. Nobody issues warnings about things that aren't happening, so we can therefore assume that only 30 years after it was first mentioned, Christmas was already being spent as a day of secular pleasure. And so it continued. By the mid-7th century, Theodore of Tarsus, Archbishop of Canterbury, was reminding his followers that while it was fine to eat well at Christmas, the church frowned on gluttony. It is difficult not to conclude that many were indulging on that day. To understand how St. Nicholas went from a thin bishop living in the Mediterranean to the plump and jolly Santa Claus that we're familiar with, one only has to read Clement Clarke Moore's famous poem, The Night Before Christmas, written in 1823. In the poem, he describes the Santa that millions have grown to love. His eyes how they twinkled, his dimples how merry. His cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard on his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth. In the smoke it encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowl full of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him, in spite of myself. Thomas Nast, a Bavarian immigrant and political cartoonist responsible for creating the donkey symbol for Democrats and the elephant for Republicans, is also responsible for bringing Clement Clarke Moore's Santa to life through his artwork. In 1863, Nast went to work for Harper Weekly, and his drawings of Santa Claus were published from 1863 to 1886, the most popular one being Merry Old Santa Claus. So there you have it. The Santa Claus and the Christmas that we know today are literally less than 200 years old and have practically nothing to do with religion. You don't need a reason for the season. Just have fun. Merry Christmas.